Open recent. Let me just open one thing. Okay, that's good. That's good. Nobody's looking for me.
On this stuff, I've zoomed in, so now what I'm going to do is, you need that, don't you? Where are you going to put that?
Wherever it's out of the way. Whatever you want. That, I'm done with that. I can throw that out.
Yeah, I'm going in tighter on this lot. Oh, gosh, again. I'm sitting on them, frightening myself. Right, let me have a look here. So if you can, just put your drink just over that way a bit more. Yeah, that's got it. That's cool. Okay, well, we are rolling.
Okay.
You just let us know why you're such a Beatles fan.
I do get asked a lot about the Beatles and why there's this kind of all-consuming passion I have for the Beatles, and I don't really have a good answer. I know when we heard them on the Ed Sullivan Show, it probably started about then, and I was already tapping around on things at school, and I was in trouble a lot because I was making a lot of noise with my hands. I always had a lot of rhythm, and I was pretty good with timing. And after the Beatles came out, my parents bought me a small little toy. You know, I was 10 years old, I think, and they bought me a little kid's drum kit. And within a week, it was in shreds. It wasn't made for hard playing. It was a little toy. And within a week, it was ruined. And they said, okay, we think he might be serious about this. And talked to the school and talked to my teachers and all that sort of thing. And I ended up with a pretty nice first drum kit from my folks. And I started playing Beatle records and Beatle albums in our front living room, and I would turn the speaker to the stereo out toward the front yard, and I would open the windows, and I would sit in the living room playing like I was on stage playing to an audience, and all the neighborhood kids would come sit in the grass in the front yard, and I'm in the house playing for them. Sorry, I couldn't see that. There was a little snip right there.
There is.
Sorry about that. And it was great fun for me because I'm on stage playing drums, and these kids are watching, and they got more and more and more, and pretty soon I'm at school, and a guy approached me and asked if I wanted to consider rehearsing and trying to play in their band. They had 2 guitar players, a bass player, and a singer, and they needed a drummer. And I said, well, yeah, I'll talk about it. And so we kicked it around, and we ended up coming up with a little band. And we played at school dances, and we played a few things around the neighborhood. And we became the soul. First off, we were the Soul Seekers. Then we became the Shadows of Night, I think it was. And yeah, I can't remember all the names, but yeah, we were a garage band. We literally practiced in somebody's garage. And it was really fun. But I think it was because of the Beatles, and I think it was that passion. And then their next album came out, and it was great. And then their next album came out, and it was great. And then they changed their hairstyles. Then they started changing how they dressed. Then they stopped touring and got serious in the studio. They stopped touring. Beatles got together and were recording big-time stuff. They were on Ed Sullivan in February of '64. And by the time they get to '66, they had to stop touring. They were in fear of their lives. There was some concerns on their safety after only 2 years of touring in the U.S. So they had something going that really nobody could touch. Nobody ever had that kind of popularity, and they certainly don't have that kind of staying power. But I was always impressed with the fact that they took everything to another level. How they looked, how they dressed, how they walked, how they wrote songs. Paul and John would get together at Paul's house in Cavendish, in Liverpool, and they would sit and start writing, and they wouldn't stop. They would go for 3-hour segments, and every time they got together for a 3-hour segment, they came out with a song. So when it came time to go in the studio, when they booked studio time once a week, they went in there usually with 4 or 5 songs, and that they went in and they played it with the other guys, and the other guys would catch up. They would have a little rehearsal about it, and they would lay down their first take, and that's the way they did it. I said Cavendish. Sorry, Paul was Forthland Road. John lived on Cavendish. But at any rate, they really dug into the fact that they started writing their own music because they were on the bill with a lot of other people, and they were doing rock and roll cover songs their first year together as a band, getting jobs. And they were pretty good, and they were held to be the closing act a lot of times. And by the time it got to their set, some of the earlier bands had already played all the same songs that they were going to play. So that's when they said, okay, we got to start writing our own material. And they became songwriters, mostly out of necessity, because they were being shown up or embarrassed having to sing the same songs that everybody else was singing. So, but there's so many moments of things that they did. For example, there's only one song that all 4 are credited on, and that was an instrumental. The only instrumental they ever recorded was a song called Flying, and it was on the Magical Mystery Tour album, and they recorded it in L.A., and that's the only song that they all 4 played on. They all got credit as composers. There's one Beatles song with no guitar on it, and it's called She's Leaving Home from Sgt. Pepper. And there's just so much growth, and they did so many things. They broke so much new ground every single time out. And you look back at some of those songs. Look at what McCartney did with a stand-up upright piano on Lady Madonna. That piano still stands in Studio 2 at Abbey Road in London, and all the musicians that go in walk by and touch or pat or rub on that stand-up piano. It's still in there. But everybody that I know of that's serious rock and roll players, and even those that are now retiring, they're getting to the age of retirement. Elton, Billy Joel, all of them, they all credit the Beatles for them even getting started. Guitar players, everybody did. And I think for me, the passion has never let up. And when I went to see the Beatles Love Show at the Mirage, I found that one of my former photo students works at the show. He works backstage at the Mirage on the Beatles Love Show. And so he brought me backstage. I saw the show a number of times before it closed this past July. But he would always take me backstage, and whoever was with me, we would always go backstage, meet the players, the artists, the trapeze artists. It was a Cirque du Soleil show. And talk to the sound engineer about how that soundtrack was produced, and how Giles Martin flew over from London with it on his lap and brought it in, and that's the original. They don't use duplicates of that soundtrack when they played the shows live. They played that track, the original tape. They made safety copies, but they played the original. And just so much stuff that meant so much. My mother called one night. She'd been in Vegas with my sister, and she called. It was pretty late at night when she called, and she said, Terry and I just saw the Beatles Love Show. And she was crying. And she said, I just saw the most amazing thing. And she said, I never understood your passion for the Beatles until tonight. She said, I see it now, and I learned, and I get it. And I fully understand. And I thought, well, that was nice. But I've introduced the Beatles to a lot of people, and I know I'm certainly not the biggest Beatles fan on the planet, but I'm bigger than most Beatle fans on the planet, because I've made so many trips over there, and I've photographed so many things, and it's just meant so much to me. I have collectibles that is pretty remarkable. I've got a warehouse filled with memorabilia I've been collecting since 1964, and I've got a lot of things, a lot of items. So don't know what it means. I don't know why it's that way. I do have to say one horribly sad tale. In about 96, I was asked by one of the photo magazines if I wanted to write a story on rock and roll, the history of rock and roll photography. And I said, sure. I was writing a lot in those days for photo magazines. And this was for Studio Photography and Design magazine. And I got the call to write this story. And I said, well, you know, I knew Paul was about to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist. He'd already been in at the Beatles. He'd already been inducted as Wings. And now he was about to be inducted as a solo artist. And I told the person that called me, the editor, I said, well, you know, the story can't be complete without me meeting and talking to Paul McCartney, because, you know, Paul and Linda McCartney met because of photography, and Linda was a great photographer. Paul's daughter, Mary, is a really great photographer in England, and photography's been a big part of Paul's life, and he's a collector of photography. And so she said, well, let me see what I can do. She came back and she said, well, okay, I got you an all-access pass, a press pass, and a backstage pass, and I've been promised you'll have 15 minutes alone with McCartney backstage. And I was over the moon. Since I couldn't play with him, I wanted to at least photograph him in my lifetime. And so it was being promoted on VH1 heavily for Wednesday, I think it was February 14th. Wednesday, February 14th. And I blocked off Tuesday the 13th to go into the city, charge batteries, get some rest, be ready, be on my game for the next afternoon, for the next evening for the taping. I missed the fact that it was taped on Monday, and I didn't make it. I missed the show. And I'm sitting watching the news that night. I was in New York, and I'm watching the news, and this flash comes across that said, Paul McCartney, Billy Joel, Elton John, and others rocked the stage with an all-star rendition of Hey Jude. And I'm just staring at the TV going, wait, what? And my then wife across the room said, oh my God, you just stood up Paul McCartney. And then it hit me what I did. I have the wrong day on my calendar. So, boy, that was a big mistake on my part, wasn't it? So I became acquainted with Paul's photographer that year. Really, really good guy. And he had photographed Paul's second wedding to Heather Mills. And he had photographed a couple of world tours with Paul. And really good guy. And Bill Bernstein is his name. And he's a great New York shooter. And I sent him a note about it. And I said, I'm so ashamed and I'm so sad and I'm heartbroken and I don't know what to do. And he wrote right back and said, listen, he's a pretty good guy. And when you do get to photograph him one day, you will. You're going to have to tell him the story. He'll enjoy the story. So that was my one big regret in life, as I missed that calendar date. So anyway, that I could go on and on for a long time. I have conducted Beatle trivia competitions. I think I've got enough pictures to do a book. I think I've certainly got enough to do an exhibit, and maybe even a collectible set of photographs. But I don't know I'm not sure where the passion came from, but it lives within me every day. Steve, our producer-director here, that's executive director on this project, was in the car with me all weekend, and he made the comment, do you ever change the channel off of the Beatles channel? I was like, why would I do that? I told him, I said, I don't even know why I pay for all these other channels because I'm not using them. I stay on the Beatles channel all the time. That's just the way it is in my world. Thanks for listening. Thanks for letting me spew about these four little boys that came from this funky little blue-collar town of dock workers, and right after the war, and they changed the world. They're still changing the world. That music still lives. 6.5 years after they broke up, they still had 5 or 6 #1 songs on the charts, in the top 100 charts. 6.5 years after they broke up. Nobody does that, So anyway, thanks for listening.